An Israel-Hezbollah ceasefire deal may be on the horizon. According to Axios, Israel and Lebanon have reached an agreement to end the fighting between the pair. This comes amid the ongoing conflict in the region that has claimed over 3,500 Lebanese lives and injured more than 15,000 civilians. Speaking to Axios, US officials said the Israeli Security Cabinet could approve the deal as early as Tuesday, though there are sticking points.
Though Israel has eliminated nearly all of Hezbollah's military leaders, the group has continued to fire missiles into Israel. Tens of thousands of Israelis have evacuated from the border to escape the fighting. There's growing pressure on the Israeli government to end the fighting so that the displaced people can return home. Now, both sides traded strikes over the weekend, with the biggest coming from Hezbollah since Israel launched a widespread bombardment of Lebanon 2 months ago. If a ceasefire deal is reached, this would be a win, of course, for the outgoing Joe Biden administration. Is it too little too late, however? Speaking on Face the Nation on Sunday, Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen signaled his displeasure with the way President Biden has handled this conflict.
But I also wish the president had effectively used U.S. leverage to essentially assert his own positions. We've seen this pattern where President Biden makes demands of Prime Minister Netanyahu only to be ignored or slapped down entirely. And then President Biden sends more bombs and more money. Mm-hmm. That is not an effective use of leverage. So I do hope in these closing months, the president will finally make more effective use of American leverage to, at the very least, uphold American law, to insist that the Netanyahu government allow humanitarian aid into Gaza and that they use our weapons in a manner consistent with the laws of war.
Yeah, Chris Van Hollen's point there is very well taken. I've agreed with it. I've made it several times. I don't know why the pressure would suddenly get more increased or dramatic from Joe Biden. It already harmed what was his re-election effort and then was Kamala Harris's election effort, clearly, in that the Arab American Muslim vote breaking significantly for Jill Stein or even for Trump in places like in Michigan, a pivotal second most important state to win. Joe Biden has failed to motivate or move Netanyahu's policy in any way, as far as I can tell. And what's important for viewers to realize is that this is somewhat historically unprecedented. The U.S. has always been the U.S. government, staunchly on Israel's side. We've been supporters since the beginning, Harry Truman, etc. But Republican and Democratic administrations have told Israel to rein it in when the chaos or the violence has become too bad, and we have started to worry about the security position of Israel and of ourselves. Reagan did this with Israel in very similar circumstances, and that was the end of their intervention. Biden has not done that. No. Biden has said he doesn't like it, but he hasn't done anything about it, and that is outside the norm for the way things used to be.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think it has really marred Joe Biden's presidency. There has been this sense throughout that he has repeatedly sort of said that he's very cross with Netanyahu and nothing ever happens, and that has happened about the provision of aid into Gaza. It has happened about the enormous civilian death toll in Gaza. It has happened about the invasion of Lebanon and assorted other things. And I'm not quite sure why Biden has given up the sense of leverage, to use Senator Van Hollen's words, in such a blatant way. Now, of course, on the left, it feeds suspicion that really it is the expression of misgivings that is kind of fake, that Biden actually agrees with the policy and is just trying to find...
That would be more honest if he would just say that. For instance, John Fetterman, for instance, agrees with the policy, thinks we should support what they're doing, and is transparent and honest about it. Joe Biden says he does not agree with the policy, but doesn't do anything about it, even though we have now, and I don't think we should order our allies around. Again, I don't want to police the world, but we do give them lots of money and support that we don't have to give them. So it is fine, in my view, for that to come with strings attached, or to just not give it at all, which is what I would advocate. If we're giving it, it should come with some strings attached. but he's just totally unwilling to use that leverage.
No, absolutely. And the amounts of money and aid involved are enormous. There was a study by Brown University fairly recently that would consider it was, I think it was 17.8, certainly almost $18 billion of military aid in a year.
Israel is a more financially stable country than we are. They have a lower debt to GDP ratio than we do.
Right.
Why are we bailing out their military?
Yeah.
Doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
And the other point is when Biden leans into the more traditional liberal or democratic argument about the importance of human rights and all of that, this just makes a mockery of that. I mean, you cannot really legitimately be contending that you're sort of holding up the importance of proportionality or protecting civilians or getting aid in with one hand while shoveling enormous amounts of bombs and missiles with the other. On the Lebanon question, just briefly, Robby, before we sort of wrap this up, I mean, that is a very complicated situation. Hezbollah struck Israel basically as soon as October 7th happened. The Israelis then ultimately invaded Lebanon, which is obviously an invasion of another sovereign nation. And although we think these ceasefire talks are reaching something approximating a agreement of a kind, it's very, very up in the air. There's all sorts of disagreements about which nations should be monitoring who complies with the terms of the ceasefire. There are all sorts of questions about whether the Israelis actually want to reserve the right to go into Lebanon again. And I think to look at the big picture, this all wraps into the question, which also pertains in Gaza, about whether Benjamin Netanyahu personally really wants peace, because there are political and legal vulnerabilities to him at home if the conflict in either place ends.
Yes, his incentives are certainly very perverse. It seems a difficult problem. Israel has come under assault from terrorist groups in the surrounding areas, including obviously on October 7th, when I think it had to respond and retaliate against a massacre of that level by this terrorist group, but in responding to it has killed thousands and thousands of people, of children, of non-combatants, has leveled Gaza, has totally destroyed it, and in the process has killed the planner, the organizer of the terrorist attacks, Yahya Sinwar, and then has not, could have unfurled the mission accomplished banner then, but as you said, the effort has continued under Netanyahu, who might have incentives to remain at war so as not to face the consequences for his actions, which include allowing the terrorist attack to occur. It occurred under his watch. There's something, even if you agree with his policies, as to be clear, many Israelis do, and I have serious questions about whether if a different administration was in charge, you would get a markedly different policy. Maybe you would, maybe you wouldn't. But he ought to go on the sole basis of having failed his country on that level.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's certainly...
even from a hardliner position.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly the hardliner position. I think there are a lot of people... I mean, there are obviously peace groups in Israel. I mean, it has got quite hollowed out over the years. But I think in terms of the global opinion, certainly, there is widespread revulsion, really, at the way Israel has conducted that campaign. The thousands of people killed, the starvation of people, the just shunting people from one zone to another, really appalling stuff. And I think, in fact, in the biggest picture of all, that has isolated Israel to a much greater extent on the international stage and has hollowed out what used to be bipartisan support for Israel here to a large extent as well.
Coming up next on Rising, we've got an interview with friend of the show, Michael Schellenberger. You won't want to miss that. Stick around.